You know that feeling you get when you buy the cheap version of something? You're looking for a great deal, but in the weeks and months after you get it home, you start to realize you really should have just splashed out for the big brand name version of that same thing. Well, the Haval Jolion is one of those things that seems like a great deal on paper, but in the weeks and months after you get it home, will you regret your decision? Should you just have bought a hybrid Toyota Corolla Cross or a Hyundai Kona HEV instead? Well, I've spent a little over 3 months and a little over 2,000 Ks with this one here to find out.
This version of the Haval Jolion, the top spec Ultra Hybrid, wears a price tag of $49.90. And that's drive away, which means it's effectively the same price as the most basic versions of the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid or the brand new Hyundai Kona Hybrid, once you add those on-roads to the equation. Also, it's important to note that our Haval here is a true plugless hybrid. That means it has an electric motor which is big enough to actually drive the wheels, unlike a mild hybrid, and it's also not a plug-in hybrid, so you don't need to worry about charging it to get the fuel-saving benefit. Because you're getting a top-spec car at the price of an entry-level rival, the list of standard equipment is also excellent. For example, our Jolion Ultra gets LED headlights, 18-inch alloy wheels, keyless entry and push-start ignition, synthetic leather interior trim with an electrically adjustable driver's seat as well as heating for the front 2 positions, a 12.3-inch multimedia touchscreen with wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto connectivity, dual-zone climate control, a 7-inch digital instrument panel, a wireless phone charger, and a panoramic opening sunroof. The synthetic leather interior trim and the sunroof are particularly impressive at this price, while many rivals are offering fabric trims, smaller wheels, and a less robust digital offering.
Yes, it's a great list of kit, and I'm going to walk you through some of my favorite features and some of my least favorite features that I found in my time with this car shortly. But first, let's talk design, because I think while Chinese cars have been accused of being derivative or even ugly in the past, I think the current batch have gone a long way to establish their own design languages, and the Jolion is a great example of this.
For a start, the Jolion is in a real Goldilocks zone when it comes to its sizing. It's slightly bigger than many of its more direct price rivals like that Corolla Cross or Hyundai Kona. Instead, it punches into a size bracket above to compete with cars like the Nissan Qashqai and Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross. This means it looks a bit more substantial on the road, and it backs it with a quite contemporary style. I like its square side profile and contoured bonnet, and I like its eye-grabbing chrome-tinged face with a very unique LED light profile to keep it interesting at night. But it's not without its flaws. While I think the shape is still quite good around the rear, there's just way too much going on in terms of badge work. This might work in other markets, but here in Australia, the general consensus is less badge work says more about the car. The same goes for the inside, which has some great elements and some less impressive ones.
There's bits of the design in here which I love and other bits that I don't. I quite like the minimalist sort of terraced dash layout that's clad in its own share of soft touch materials. And I quite like the textures that run their way through here as well, just to keep things interesting. And the chrome touches, they do their own part to lift the cabin ambience quite a bit. Let's be honest here though, the synthetic leather trim in this Haval is not convincing anyone. It is very vinyl-y, and I don't love the Haval badge work on the seats either. But one thing I will say is because it's so padded in here, it is quite comfortable even over longer distances. The digital bits are quite nice too. You've got an instrument cluster in here which is quite customizable, and you've got this rather large multimedia touchscreen as well. It is just a shame that you do have to adjust pretty much everything through the touchscreen. There are a couple of shortcut buttons here for your climate controls and things like that, but you do have to control fan speed, temperature, things like that through the touchscreen only. And the same goes for volume. There are no dials for that either. So you have to swipe out a tray to the side and then use your volume controls on the touchscreen. It's a very distracting experience while you're trying to drive the car.
I was also not such a fan of the rotary shifter, which doesn't lock into its 3 available places and instead rotates freely. It means you have to be really vigilant about which gear you have selected.
Now, aside from those software jumbles, which are pretty annoying and they have gotten on my nerves on my time with the car, the front of the cabin here is actually really practical space. In the door, there's a huge pocket with plenty of room for our CarsGuide bottle, and there's a further 2 in this little flip out sort of armrest console piece as well. They're of different sizes and they're fixed, which is pretty weird because the small one doesn't really fit much, but aside from that, it's nice to have them there anyway. This center console is a really brilliant piece of design because it's thought of things in a very different way. There's a couple of slots and they're sized kind of perfectly for the sorts of objects that you're going to take with you in your car. You've got this one here which is perfect for a phone. You can pop it there, and there's this brilliant little bit of design with this cable managed hole to send your Apple CarPlay cable through and hide it away down there. And it's just one of those little areas where you can tell Chinese car companies sort of think of these things as tech products more than anything else. There's also a little slot here next to that which is perfect for magnetic cards, good if you've got a parking garage card or something like that. And then there's a large slot here which is perfect for wallets, keys, you name it. And of course you've got your wireless charger under there too. It's got a nice rubberized surface so your phone won't exit when you go to corner. And the other area where it's really brilliant is this big storage area under here. My partner likes putting a handbag under there, stuff like that. I can fit a book down there, and that's where your cables go as well. So really tidy, almost like an EV. It's clever, I like it. The back seat of the Jolion might be its best attribute, just generally. Everyone I've had back here has been so impressed with the amount of room they have and the feel of the car, and they get shocked when I tell them that it's an affordable Chinese hybrid. Behind my own driving position there, I'm 182 centimeters tall. You can see how much room I have. It's enormous. I wouldn't expect most mid-size SUVs to have that much room, let alone something in the smaller SUV bracket. There's also a perfectly flat floor. It's almost like an EV back here, and that means you've always got somewhere to put your feet. And if you put an adult in this center position, they've got somewhere to put their feet too. So it does really up the practicality back here quite a bit. Now, in terms of storage, we've got a few things. So we've got a large pocket in the door here, plenty of room for our CarsGuide bottle. And if we pull down our little armrest here, we've got two more with variable edges as well, so you're not going to lose anything out of there. Clever touch. It's also nicely padded. The seats back here are quite nicely padded too, just the same as the front. Nice and comfortable over long trips. In terms of amenities, you've got two adjustable air vents back there, and you've got two USB ports with little flip open covers, so you're not going to get sand and stuff stuck in there.
One area where the hybrid Jolion specifically isn't as good is its boot capacity. While combustion versions have quite a large boot area, the hybrid drops by a significant 40 litres to just 390 litres. This is a little below par for the segment. It's a nice wide space, but it's not very tall, so to fit the full CarsGuide luggage set, we had to remove the parcel shelf. Even then, the medium case would have had an impact on your rear visibility.
Now, under this fairly nondescript cladding down here, there's a 1.5 litre four-cylinder engine running the Atkinson cycle, which is more efficient but less powerful. And there's a big electric motor in there as well. It's bigger than most hybrids. See the power figures for the engine, the motor, and the combined power figures on your screen now.
The Jolion drives the front wheels via a hybrid transaxle. The way it works means there are certain speeds where it drives fully electrically, some speeds where power is blended, and some speeds where it will only use the combustion engine. But all you need to know is that it basically feels like driving a continuously variable automatic, and it's so slick it's impossible to tell when it's switching between those power sources, which can't be said for every hybrid.
Now, I bet what you really want to know is whether any of the stuff going on under here is actually going to save you any fuel. Well, if you grabbed a SUV like this with a 2-litre engine, you'd expect to see something like 7.5 or 8 litres to 100 kilometres. But here, I've landed straight on the Jolion's claim of 5 litres to 100 kilometres, and that's very good.
As an added bonus, the Jolion can run on entry-level 91 unleaded fuel, and because it has a pretty large fuel tank, you can theoretically travel about 1,100 kilometers per tank. In fact, after I picked this car up, I didn't even refuel it until the light came on and it showed 1 bar of fuel left, at which point the trip computer had told me I'd traveled over 900 kilometers. Next up, let's talk about how the Jolion feels from behind the wheel.
Okay, so the first thing you need to know about the Jolion Hybrid is that it's the best version of the Jolion, and that's down to this hybrid system and its clever hybrid transaxle gearbox, which replaces the clunky 7-speed dual clutch that appears in other versions of this car. This hybrid system is so good because it's so smooth, especially when you're going to take off. That strong electric motor works really nicely to keep the drive experience nice and effortless. You just put your foot on the accelerator and off you go. You don't have to worry about the clunky nature of one of those cheap dual clutch gearboxes getting in the way. So yes, it's got a funky sort of hybrid transaxle that's quite complicated, a little bit difficult to explain, but all you need to know is it basically works in a very similar way to Toyota's hybrid Synergy drive. So if you've driven a Toyota hybrid before, the drive experience here is very similar. For a driver, it essentially behaves like a continuously variable automatic. It's really effortless, there's no perceivable gear changes, and importantly, you can't tell when it switches between the electric motor and the combustion engine. It just does it automatically and completely free of any clunking through the drivetrain. So it's really lovely, it's really smooth to drive, and as I said, it makes it the best version of the Jolion on the road. So what about other elements of the drive experience? Well, you've got quite direct steering here, which keeps this car feeling quite good in the corners, although it is a little doughy at low speeds. And this became most evident when we put this car in a comparison against the Hyundai Kona. The Kona was just all round, more refined, more polished when it came to things like the steering and the pedal feel as well, which in this car is also a little bit doughy and distant. It's not as though the brakes don't work, it's that they have kind of a funny feel when they blend the regen braking and the actual physical discs. Actually, because this car has quite a powerful electric motor, it's also got a little bit of a quirk in that you can use a single pedal driving mode, just like in an EV. It doesn't quite feel like an EV, and the deceleration for that single pedal mode is a little bit sort of inconsistent like it is in electric GWM products, but it's interesting that it has it. The other thing you should know is that the performance on offer here isn't quite what the combined figure from this hybrid setup suggests. Yes, it's fine off the line and it's got a little bit of straight line performance, which is nice and smooth because of that electric motor, but it's not quite the same turbocharged fun you might have in a combustion rival. Now, Chinese cars in the past haven't exactly been known for their fantastic ride and handling, but I think the Jolion goes a long way to correcting that. The nice long wheelbase in this car and the halfway decent tyres that it ships on means that it's actually quite a bit of fun to throw into corners, and it handles itself pretty admirably as well. It's no performance star, and as we've already mentioned, the Hyundai Kona was quite a bit better when we compared it in those back-to-back tests, especially when it came to its ride and its handling. But that having been said, this is a big step forward for Chinese cars generally, and I don't think you're going to be hugely disappointed by what's on offer here, especially since it's not that far behind its more established rivals. And the same rings true for the ride and refinement. The ride in the Jolion is actually pretty good, and I've got to say this hybrid version has the best ride of all the Jolions I've tested. You do get a multi-link setup in the sportier S version, which can be had for roughly the same money as this car, but even though this one's got a torsion beam, it's sort of more softly sprung than the S, so it's quite a bit more comfortable over bumps. But the ride isn't magic. It does feel a little bit hollow and a little bit bouncy, and it can occasionally have some moments where it's not as composed as it should be, like it'll skip over corrugations. That's because the car's quite light, and honestly, it's a pretty minor complaint. On the whole, I'm pretty impressed with the ride quality that's on offer here. Refinement's not bad either, especially if you're driving around town. It's pretty quiet here in the cabin, and it helps that you've got that hybrid setup, so there's not as much engine noise entering. But you really only do get a bit more wind noise and a bit more tire noise when you are at those freeway speeds. So this car really is at its best when you're around town. So if you're a keen driver and you're thinking of adding one of these to your driveway, will you be disappointed by the way it drives? I'd say no, you'll actually be quite impressed because this car actually handles itself really well, especially compared to its rivals. Yes, it's not quite as polished. Yes, it doesn't quite handle or steer just as well, but it's not by a huge margin like I've experienced on some Chinese cars before. It's getting really close, and I think those big mainstream players, they should be worried.
Safety kit is an interesting story because yes, you get the full set of stuff here in the top spec Jolion, including key things like auto emergency braking, lane keep tech, and blind spot monitoring. But there's more to the story.
Now, we all know it's all well and good to tick a bunch of safety boxes, but these days with these systems that can quite heavily interfere with the drive experience, you need to calibrate them quite well, and it's something that Chinese cars haven't been particularly good at in the past. Here in the Jolion though, most of its systems are pretty low key. There is one system that I really don't like. It's the lane keep assist software. It's on every time you start the car, and you do have to go through a rigmarole of turning it off through the touchscreen. The reason that I don't like this system is because when you're on a multi-lane expressway or a freeway, it will occasionally just grab the steering wheel out of your hands and quite violently overcorrect it back into the lane. It's not as bad as some systems I've used, but it's not great either. One thing I do like about the Jolion specifically though, is you can permanently turn off the driver monitoring system in this car. Now in lesser versions of the Jolion that I've driven, you're actually unable to permanently turn this system off, and it is really invasive, and you do have to then go through the rigmarole of turning it off through the touchscreen several menus deep as well. So I'm glad I can permanently turn it off in this version of this car. So one thing I really do like about the Jolion is it's quite easy to park, and it's not because the visibility is particularly good out the back. In fact, it isn't. It's got quite a small aperture for that rear window, but it's got an excellent 360-degree reversing camera, which makes it so easy to position. It's one of the best reversing cameras I've actually used, and props to Haval for putting it in such an affordable car.
I was also not a fan of this car's adaptive cruise control, which aggressively slows the car down for corners. As I couldn't find a way to turn this particular quirk off, I ended up not really using the cruise control at all. Elsewhere, the Jolion maintains a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating to the 2019 standards, offering an array of 7 airbags.
Like other upstart automakers, Haval is offering a quite long warranty, 7 years and unlimited kilometers with this car. And during that time, you get 5 years of roadside assist and a 5-year cap price servicing program as well.
Servicing works out to about $330 per annum for those 5 years, which isn't quite Toyota cheap, but it's pretty close. It's also more affordable than the Hyundai Kona Hybrid.
So, after my months with the Haval Jolion Ultra Hybrid, do I think you'll regret your decision buying one of these over one of its very good rivals? Well, I think, honestly, you really won't, because in the smaller areas where this car falls behind and doesn't quite have the polish of those rivals, it more than makes up for with its great price, great value, it's super efficient, and it's massive on the inside too. In fact, I think polish is really the only thing that's missing here. The Haval Jolion Hybrid is that moment where this brand will start to be taken seriously against its more mainstream rivals.